it really harms us. Please, I urge you please to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Anybody else? Come on up. You'll be next. So be on deck.
I beat you to it. Hello guys, my name is Derek O'Loughlin. I own 2553 Cottage Avenue. I appreciate everything that you're doing to try to get this island back to where it is, and I know it's got to be very hard to do. But I'd like to just put a couple of points together, if I could, in objection to the food park. The first thing I want to say is that the applicant has never contacted me whatsoever. The second thing I want to say, I have the most impact. I am the closest to the trash enclosure and the restrooms, and not once has he contacted me. That being said, I'm a contractor by trade, I'm a tradesman, and I've been down here for 17 years, on and off, but there doesn't seem to be a clear path or process through your ordinances. You don't have ordinances for a food park, and then I've read your ordinances. I'm gonna give you one that I think is important, okay? He's looking for a 10-foot buffer. I read your ordinances, and it's a minimum of 15 feet. Okay, that ordinance is 10-416. So it's telling me that the process that you have to allow something like this go on is not in place. And if you look at that ordinance, it clearly states it's a 15-foot buffer, then it goes all the way to 30 feet with circumstances changing. That being said, that's your base plan. The second thing I have a problem with is there's no specific planning going on here. Typically, in our industry, they show up with a traffic report, they show up with usually an elevation, a nice site plan. All we got here is a render. And it seems from what I've read, they're changing this all the way around, all over the place, just to satisfy, but they're not giving in on any of the key points. Another thing I have a problem with is safety. Do we have laws in Fort Myers? I don't know. Is there laws here to ensure safety, the transient traffic, these restrooms that they could be shooting up in or whatever they're doing? That's the first one. But the second one I want to know is, who's going to pay for it? Is the Lee County Sheriff going to be paid by Fort Myers Beach to sit out at the gate all day to keep an eye on them, or go by there at 10 o'clock at night? I think that's a huge problem that I have with this going through. Finally, financially, listen to this, I'm the biggest loser. Now, I'm not going to say I'm the biggest loser in the long term because I'm the poorest guy on the block. But on the long term, I think the residents around me are going to lose an awful lot of money. And I'm going to ask you guys, would you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on them lots with a food park that's going to diminish your thing? And finally, I want to say this. I have a set of plans in. I've been dealing with this guy here for a long time, paying, by the way, but I'm willing to invest $500,000-$600,000 of money that I really don't have, and I can't put that money in there and have it running down the road on me. Like I said, I'm getting ready to retire, and that's where I am,
Thank you very much.
and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Don't forget the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the south end of the island. You could be a mascot. Okay, sir?
I'm sorry, I didn't sign in.
Well, come on up, we'll do you all at once. Is there anyone else other than this gentleman that wishes to speak? Randy, you've been registered. And have you been sworn in? Okay. Amy, this gentleman has not been signed in.
Terrible, Ian, I believe we decided that 18 months we could have food trucks on Fort Myers Beach, and I thought that was quite reasonable because we needed to feed the workers and such. But now we're actually looking at having food truck parks in residential areas, like permanently. And I'm just curious to know, and it's the only question I have, is this a direction the LPA wants to go? Instead of brick and mortar, having food trucks especially in residential areas. But thank you so much for all your time. We really appreciate you stayed late.
Thank you very much, sir. Nope, come on up.
Jordan Hester, I work with the client group. Very short, there are going to be some drone aerials and a short video that is in the packet that Becker sent you. The most important thing I think that I took away from it while filming it was that I went from the 6th floor right onto the site, and then I did a 180 right into their parking lot. So their underground area, and I don't know if it has been stated quite succinctly, is very accessible to literally anyone with posted signs. So that is kind of a concern that I noticed while we were flying. But feel free to review the video, it's very good, just as you wanted to take kind of an environmental look at what's in a 2 or 3 block area of this, just the site. It's not just the site, I sort of flew it up and back down Chapel and the secondary
Mingo.
road that's right. Yes, thank you. It's hard to remember these off the top of my head, but that's it.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
guys.
Jordan.
Also,
Appreciate it.
thank you guys very much for extending today. I know this
You're
is
very
a lot.
welcome. You're very welcome. Randy?
Yeah, thank you for giving me a couple minutes back. So, please excuse my poor technology skills, but I wanted to,
Randy, say your name again. for the
oh,
record.
sorry.
That's okay.
Randy Bryce, owner at Pelican Watch. So, I want to play this. Maybe not. If I took the volume control off. That was 150 feet plus from the restaurant on the food truck on the beach that's down by Lonnie. I think it's called VR Beach Food or something like that. That was from Estero Boulevard all the way to their property line with their speakers facing out.
Come back to the mic.
With their speakers facing out towards the ocean. That was 150 feet in back of that, and that was the sound that I recorded. That was last evening at 6:30 p.m.
At the Lonnie Kai?
Yeah, there's a little food truck next to it. It's called like We Are the Beach Food or something like that. I don't know the technical name of it. I haven't been there yet because my wife doesn't like eating on the sand. She's not here, so I can say that. But just a couple other final comments. So I think that kind of drives the point home, though. As I was walking by, I go, "Wow, this is what our future is." So I would say, though, few kind of things. We have a couple units up for sale. I met with one of the prospective buyers yesterday and the real estate agent, and we have comments from 2 prior visitors that it's already, since this development is publicized, already affecting buying behavior in our building. We have comments from 2 realtors that both owners said this is not really what we're looking for. We thought this would be something different. So it already is having an effect on some of the opportunities that our owners have. But the last thing I wanted to say is, I have no idea how you're gonna vote. I hope it's no, but if you do vote to approve, I would ask that you add 3 very specific provisions as conditions. One is no live music. It's a big deal to us. Second is, if you allow ambient music, which I think came up, somebody asked about ambient music. The National Restaurant Association standard for conversational music is 58 decibels. That is in the NRA guidelines, 58, well below city code. So please consider that, because I think ambient is an interesting way to go, but it can't be at 75. And then one other thing, and I have spoken to the applicants and Ken about this on our last call, is the ingress and egress off Chapel with proper design could be a forced right-hand turn out towards Estero instead of an open turn, letting it go either way they want. So just to keep cars from trying to figure out if they want to go left or right on Cottage, if we forced them back out to the right through a proper turn island there, that would be a really helpful thing. So that's the last thing I wanted to say, and I appreciate the extra time for being able to do that.
You're welcome, Randy. Anybody else? It's now or forever hold your peace. Carolyn, you decided against it? Okay. All right. Public hearing portion is now closed. Public, I know, I'm just talking about them, Nancy.
Oh, okay, I'm
I
sorry.
got my list. Judith?
There we go. Somebody's notebook is here. I don't know.
Whose notebook is it?
Does anybody leave a notebook up here?
I probably did.
You probably did, Randy, I think it is yours. Okay, go ahead, Judith.
Thank you.
Okay, Judith Frankel, Principal Planner, Town of Fort Myers Beach. In a moment, we're gonna review the findings, the criteria, and the staff recommendation. I did want to address a couple points that was brought up during the previous presentations. First, we have not required a traffic study at this time, mainly due to the small scale of the development. A condition could be added to require a small-scale traffic study at the time of development order. That is what was previously required for the 2007 resolution. It was never done. They never received a development order for that master concept plan at that time. We anticipate the commercial parking lot's main draw is going to be the beach, and so it would necessitate a slow turnover, people coming in the morning, staying throughout the day, and then leaving in the evening. In considering the traffic study and when it should be proposed, the development order timeframe makes sense, because then we'll have specifics about exactly the circulation and the situation of the project. So there's that. I did state at the January meeting that the town does not have specific ordinances related to mobile vendor and food truck parks. That is correct. However, the code does allow for the commercial development process, which is what we're in now. When something is not typically allowed by right, the applicant has the right to go through the CPD process to address those issues. So that's where we are now. Additionally, in the code, there are regulations referring to the uses that are gonna be present at this site. So the commercial parking lot, a restaurant, outdoor seating, consumption on premises, those are all part of the land development code. I mainly drew your attention, and the applicant drew your attention to the regulations laid out for Bonita Springs, Cape Coral, and Fort Myers, specific to the parking count, not necessarily specific to the situation and requirements for the food truck mobile vendor parks in general. It's my estimation that in terms of parking counts, that those are appropriate guidelines to utilize here. But obviously, this is a unique site, which is why we're going through the CPD process, and so you should consider those things as part of this process. Additionally, the regulation for this site, what we're discussing now, is zoning. It's not a development order, it's not a development agreement. So we're talking about the regulations guiding the land in general, okay? So, which is why we don't have more detailed plans at this time. The ordinance, if approved with conditions, would contain within it an exhibit laying out all of the conditions that the applicant has discussed, and which I'm gonna go forward and list out all of them for you here, which you have the ability to recommend any changes to that as you will, but that will be part of the regulation that goes with the zoning for the site. There are only 6 deviations for this application. The other things are conditions, which become the regulations for the site. So we are, in a sense, writing the regulations for this property, but they are specific to this, this property and not to Cape Coral or Fort Myers Beach. I just wanted to put that on the record. The deviations are allowed by the Land Development Code to provide flexibility for development. That's the language that's in there to allow for this flexibility. It is an approved, stated part of the process. The LPA may consider the deviations individually or as a set as you see fit. The comprehensive plan does in several places refer to small town character. It doesn't specifically define what that is, but I would suggest, and it's certainly subjective and open to interpretation, and I was not there when it was written, and so I would defer to the people here who were there and can speak to that intent. But I would suggest that local businesses prominently featured on the main thoroughfare to be a component of small town character. Mobile vendors, food trucks are almost typically small businesses building up their funding and clientele before growing their businesses into something larger. The small businesses facing onto Estero Boulevard with outdoor seating creates an interaction between the public realm and the private along the sidewalk and the activity in the park. The mobile vending is human scaled, another term used throughout the comprehensive plan. It is not a large building that would separate what's happening inside from what's happening outside. So in reviewing this and its compatibility with the comp plan, that was part of our consideration. We feel it is human scaled and would allow for pedestrian orientation. And when thinking about pedestrian friendly, you have to have places for people to walk to. It can't solely be one location of Times Square. When considering neighborhood compatibility, staff considers the larger area. There are other properties and property owners, including the town itself, which are adjacent to this property. So when we're talking about compatibility, that's what we're talking about, is the area as a whole. The LPA should, of course, take into consideration, as is one of the criteria you're gonna hear in a moment, the testimony of the public and public opinion. So thinking about what you've heard here today as what has been emailed to you is certainly appropriate. The proposal presented here is a reduction in intensity, and I wanted to define that so we're clear about what intensity means. The regulation governing this site now is the existing CPD. So when we're talking about the rules, it's the CPD that's there, which did have its own deviation and set of conditions, which are separate from, the standard by right of the zoning. So development intensity is a measure of size and height of a structure or structures. So as there's a very small structure present, it is a reduction in intensity. So I just wanted to clear that up in case anybody was concerned about how we're defining those things. Okay, so I'm certainly available for questions, or I can continue on into talking about the deviations and the findings and the conclusions.
Any questions for Judith at this moment?
No, right now.
Well, I have one. So talking about the comp plan, I agree with what you're saying about size and scale and whatnot. But there was a huge element when we were talking about the comp plan, which was protecting residential neighborhoods from commercial intrusion.
Mhm.
And I think that is the objection. That is the objection. And even though there is currently approved commercial expansion there, it's enclosed. And so the intrusive element of that commercial activity is limited, or at least contained.
Mhm.
So, do you have any comments on that?
So I think that's a very valid point. When reviewing this from a staff perspective, when looking at the uses of restaurant, of these kind of like gathering place, it is on paper compatible. Now,
Sure.
So
Sure.
what you're talking about of an enclosed space and containing the uses, that's absolutely a point to consider, except that that's not what's being proposed here.
No, I understand. I'm just making the comparison to, there is already commercial activity approved there. So
Mhm.
that development could occur. But this is different, because this is not contained commercial activity. This is exposed,
Correct, and this
and
is
consequently exposing all adjacent properties.
and this is the first time, to my knowledge, that you're considering a development
Yes.
of this type. So
Yep.
I think it's important to consider all of those elements and what the town's view on that is moving forward. I do expect this to not be the only proposal of this type. And that's an important consideration for the LPA.
In the market trend for the restaurants that are coming back new, Beach Bar, and, the Beached Whale, all of those have open floors and many floors.
Mhm.
So had there been a redevelopment of a restaurant, I doubt that it would have come back enclosed with the recent trends. Do you agree with that?
I think that's hard to say.
No, that's hard to say. That's hard to say.
I mean, I mean, I think you're right about what we've seen so far, but
I mean, with the tikis that are
Yeah.
people, like, you know, Sandy Bottoms is doing a tiki, the tiki is doing a tiki, you know, the beach bar's 3 stories open, 2's to the front, and, Beach Well's 3 stories open. So I can't imagine that there would be an enclosed restaurant built on all 3 levels that would be available to build. Yeah.
Let's go on with
I
the
don't know.
deviations.
Okay. If you think of something else, let me know.
I just have one more
Okay.
question, sorry. So this is surrounded by, this is all Boulevard, Estero Boulevard's all commercial. Across the street's commercial, Sandy Bottom's commercial, this property's commercial, Mom's is commercial. So everything around this, right, is commercial. Is that not different than those areas that we're talking about where, we've heard from other residents behind those restaurants that are being built that were mentioned and others with similar concerns, right? The music's loud. It was loud before Ian. It's still loud, kind of thing. Is this different in your eyes as staff? Because is it different in some way? I guess because there's a condo building or because there's a residential street. Yeah, there's residential street behind it versus I guess if you bought behind the whale was there. You knew it was there. You knew there's what I mean, kind of thing where there was nothing here. I might have came to.
There was a restaurant.
I think that
Yeah,
there
there
were
was- yeah, there
restaurants
was.
here
The
previously.
Whale's a downtown
several years ago,
district.
the
Exactly.
decade-
Right, but years and years ago, right? Like I don't even. the Mucky Duck was the last thing there, which was like
1999.
So the-
25 years ago. So
The current CPD doesn't include, the schedule of uses doesn't include a restaurant.
okay.
But the underlying zoning is CB zoning where you could have a restaurant.
Yep.
The one parcel that potentially is being added into the CPD that's on Cerro is CB zoning, and that's what's around it.
Okay.
So, this is adjacent or, directly abutting a residential neighborhood. And I think if this was a large restaurant with multiple floors and outdoor decks and things like that, it would have a much larger impact in terms of sound. Sound is difficult. It just is. It travels, there can be wind, and then it doesn't travel, and they turn up the sound, and it's a hard thing to regulate. What we've attempted to do is, in the conditions, try to mitigate that as much as possible. And if you have suggestions to further, and I would also, the applicant did provide some of their own suggestions for mitigation as well. And that could be, more thoroughly walked.
One more little tiny question, sorry. If the applicant wanted to, could they build a ground level plus 3 floors parking garage in that space? As long as they met the setbacks and with the current CPD?
No.
No,
Okay. Okay.
because the current CPD is limited to the schedule of uses that are in that
Right,
CPD.
okay.
And that's not what
Okay.
approved was.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so back to the deviations. The applicant requests the following deviations consistent with Land Development Code Section 34-2123 and 34-932B. Deviation 1 is from LDC Section 10-285 that requires driveways to be located at least 250 feet from the center line of a local street, such as Chapel Street, to allow a distance of 100 feet from Estero Boulevard. The applicant is unable to meet the 250-foot separation distance. This deviation was approved under the previous CPD, and they're asking to continue for this deviation to remain. The property is not 250 feet in depth, so they would not, based on the size, be able to meet that requirement. Deviation 2 seeks relief from Land Development Code Section 10-285 that requires, again, driveways to be located 250 feet from the center line of the intersection of Estero and Chapel, and a driveway to Pelican Watch. This deviation allows the existing driveway, there's an existing curb cut on Estero Boulevard, to remain approximately 210 feet from the Chapel Estero intersection and 150 feet from the existing driveway. This is the entrance from Estera that you saw that will be limited solely to the food trucks and trailers, not to any other delivery or service vehicles. Deviation 3 seeks relief from Land Development Code Section 34-706D, which states that existing driveway and parking spaces shall be relocated from Estera Boulevard to allow for the existing access point to remain from Estera Boulevard onto the property. That goes with what we just discussed. Deviation 4 seeks relief from Land Development Code 34-706A, which requires that off-street parking lots be placed in side or rear yards. This deviation will allow the parking lot to be located along Chapel Street between Estero and Cottage. Deviation 5 seeks relief from Land Development Code Section 34-2017, which requires high turnover parking lots to have a paved surface to allow for a crushed shell or lime rock surface. Further conditions for this deviation are in the conditions, and we can address Mr. Bowen's comment about the crushed shell when we get there. Deviation 6 seeks relief from Land Development Code 10-416 D2, Table 10-8, which requires a 15-foot wide Type D buffer when the proposed parking and vehicle use area abuts a right-of-way or road easement to allow for a minimum 10-foot wide buffer. Okay. So findings and conclusion. Land Development Code Section 34-85B and C and 34-2162 sets forth the required considerations and findings for the approval of a rezoning. 34-85B, considerations. In reaching its decision, the town council shall consider the following whenever applicable. 1, whether there exists an error or ambiguity which must be corrected. No errors or ambiguities exist. 2, whether there exists change or changing conditions which make approval of the request appropriate. The site was vacant prior to Hurricane Ian, and the redevelopment of the site makes the request appropriate. Mobile vendors / food truck parks are growing in popularity, and this use is not directly addressed in the Land Development Code, which makes the CPD process appropriate to resolve any potential conflicts of this new use. 3, the impact of a proposed change on the intent of the chapter. No impact on the intent of the chapter will occur, although the LPA may desire to consider additional regulation to govern this use in the future. 4, the testimony of any applicant, which you've heard, the recommendation of staff and the LPA, which we'll give in a moment, the testimony of the public, whether the request is consistent with the goals, objectives, policies, intent, and with the densities, intensities, and general uses as set forth in the Fort Myers Beach Comprehensive Plan. There's more in the staff report. In general, the staff finds it to be compatible with the densities, intensities, and general uses set forth in the comp plan, along with the goals, objectives, and policies. 8, whether the request meets or exceeds all performance and locational standards set forth for the proposed use. The proposed development will be required to meet performance standards set forth in 34-2031 and 34-2032. 9, whether urban services are or will be available and adequate to serve a proposed land use change. The urban services exist in this location. Whether the request will protect, conserve, or preserve environmentally critical areas and natural resources. The request will have no impact on designated environmentally critical areas and natural resources. Whether the request will be compatible with existing or planned uses and not cause damage, hazard, nuisance, or other detriment to persons or property. Staff finds the request compatible with the surrounding land uses. The potential for nuisance is minimized through providing buffers as well as several staff recommended conditions for approval. These suggested conditions include limited hours of operation to reduce the potential for noise nuisance to surrounding properties. Whether the location of the request places an undue burden upon existing transportation or other services and facilities, and will be served by streets with the capacity to carry traffic generated by the development. The current request is less intense than the previously approved master concept plan and should not place an undue burden on transportation services. Land Development Code Section 34-85C, findings. Before granting any rezoning, the town council shall find the requested zoning district complies with 1, the Fort Myers Beach Comprehensive Plan. Staff finds the proposed uses and requested deviations for the CPD comply with the comprehensive plan. This chapter, the proposed uses comply with this chapter except in regards to the deviations. 3, any other applicable town ordinances or codes. The proposed request complies with the town ordinances and codes except in regards to the deviations. Land Development Code Section 34-216B2. The recommendation made to the town council must be supported by the guidelines set forth in 34-85 of this chapter. In addition, the findings must address whether the following criteria can be satisfied. A, the proposed mix of uses is appropriate at the subject location. The proposed mix of uses is appropriate in this location as it is in the Boulevard future land use. The expanded boundary area addressed under separate ordinance, additions to the schedule of uses and the master concept plan are appropriate. The mobile vendor food truck park concept with commercial parking area is not directly anticipated in the comprehensive plan or land development code, but is not in conflict with either regulation. Sufficient safeguards to the public interest are provided by the recommended special conditions to the concept plan or by other applicable regulations. Sufficient safeguards are provided to the public interest through required buffering at the property boundaries. Additionally, staff has suggested several conditions to further safeguard the public. All recommended special conditions are reasonably related to the impact of the public's interest created by or expected from the proposed development. All conditions are related to the impacts on the public interest. The proposed use meets all specific requirements of the comprehensive plan that are relevant to the requested plan development, such as the following. Policies 4B4 and 4C3 on commercial uses in the mixed residential category. Policies 4B5 and 4C3 on commercial rezonings in the boulevard category. Policy 4C4 on building heights taller than the standard height limit. Policy 4C8 on density transfers. Policy 4E1 on pre-disaster build-back. Policy 7J2 on traffic impact analysis and potential design improvements that could offset traffic impacts. Findings for deviation request. Section 34-216.4, all deviations must be approved with modifications, or rejected based on a finding that A, each item enhances the achievement of the objectives of the plan development. The requested deviations are related to an efficient functioning of the master concept plan. B, the general intent of the chapter to protect the public health, safety, and welfare will be preserved and promoted. The proposed deviations preserve public health. Each deviation operates to the benefit or at least not to the detriment of the public interest. The deviations are not in a detriment to the public interest. Additional conditions are recommended for the master concept plan. Each deviation is consistent with the Fort Myers Beach comprehensive plan. Staff finds that the deviations are consistent with the comprehensive plan. Okay. Recommendation. Staff finds that the CPD with deviations meets the criteria set forth in section 34-85B and C and 34-216.2 of the Land Development Code. If the LPA finds that the applicant proposed parking calculations based on other local regulations is appropriate, and the recommended conditions are sufficient to reduce nuisance concerns, staff recommends approval with conditions of this application. Now I'm going to go through the recommended conditions. I have 4 notes of potential changes to these conditions, so as we get to them, if we want to make alterations, let me know. Okay, 1, the development of option A as approved and conditioned in resolution 07-28 will no longer be valid upon approval. 2, at the time of development order, the applicant must provide the following buffers. A, along Chapel Street, the west property line, a 10-foot wide buffer with a minimum of 4 trees per 100 linear feet, which is 6 trees, and a 3-foot high hedge planted in a double staggered row. B, along the east property line that extends from Estero Boulevard, a minimum 7.5-foot wide buffer with a minimum of 10 trees per 100 linear feet, and a 3-foot high hedge planted in a double staggered row. C, along the south and east property lines adjacent to 2553 and 2563 Cottage Avenue, a minimum 10-foot wide buffer with 6-foot high opaque fence where applicable, with a minimum of 8 trees per 100 linear feet and a 3-foot-high hedge planted in a double staggered row planted on the outside of the fence. Along Cottage Street, the south property line, a minimum 10-foot wide buffer with a minimum of 8 trees per 100 linear feet and a 3-foot-high hedge planted in a double staggered row. So, just wanted to note that this is required at the time of the development order, that these buffers be put in place before anything else. 3, a maximum of 5 mobile vendor transient merchant pads in addition to a permanent service structure, maximum of 2,500 square feet is permitted. Any additional mobile vendor pads not shown on the master concept plan shall require prior town approval. 4, all mobile vendors will be associated with either food or merchandise. There shall be no cannabis or smoke vape related merchandise vendors allowed. 5, consumption on the premises will be limited to beer and wine only. 6, hours of operation for the mobile vendor transient merchants and outdoor seating area will be 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. 7, the parking lot will be available for use the same hours as the mobile vending park, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. Camping or sleeping in vehicles is prohibited. 8 is about music, so I don't know whether you want to talk about that now or we can hold it to the end. I'll read you what is in the staff report now. Amplified music or entertainment is permitted outdoors until 9 p.m. and only within the designated entertainment areas indicated on the master concept plan. Outdoor amplified music or entertainment will be restricted to only solo and duo performers. No bands, 3 or more performers, or drums, percussion, unless approved through the town's special event permitting process.
Sorry, just real quick, so you're recommending amplified? It can be amplified? I thought,
That's what's in the
That's
okay, that's what's in this,
It's a
okay.
staff
That's-
recommendation.
that's what we have
can
now.
change that.
Right, got you.
Right,
Okay.
so if you would like to remove,
Yeah.
live music, this would be the place to do that. 9, all sound generated on site will be in compliance with the Fort Myers Beach Noise Ordinance, Article 2, Chapter 14. 10, a publicly accessible comfort station consisting of restrooms, outdoor shower, foot rinse, hand washing, and water fountain will either be integrated within the proposed park support structure or as a standalone structure on site. Public access to the comfort station will only be during the same hours of operation for the mobile vending park. 11, per deviation 5, and this year I'm gonna, based on Mr. Bowen's comments, suggest changing some of this language. The applicant, what it says is the applicant may utilize the stabilized gravel, lime rock, crushed shell parking surface. In general, that's going to be more pervious than an asphalt parking lot, so staff doesn't have a problem with that. However, we are suggesting that the town requires a grid or semi-pervious paver system which will help to stabilize that gravel and keep it from leaving the site. So right now, the language says encourage. I would recommend changing that to required or must. 12, mobile vendors, outdoor seating, restrooms, and any storage space must be located on an approved, stabilized, non-pervious or semi-pervious surface. 13, a temporary use permit must be obtained for any special event where additional vendors of any type and or increased visitor numbers are expected. There was a brief discussion about this earlier, but this is in here, so anything outside of the activities shown on the master concept plan, including but not limited to festival, political rally, holiday celebration, or carnival, would require a special events permit. 14, mobile vendors must provide evidence that all required permits, inspections, licensure, and other approvals are needed by either county, state, or federal agencies prior to operating within the town. There is a town ordinance that is, I think from '99, that does permit mobile vendors, mobile food trucks to operate within the town. The state of Florida, however, has preempted our ability to permit them, but there are state requirements for permits for mobile vendors, so we will just check and make sure that they've filed all the appropriate regulations with the state license. 15, Liquid waste or grease must be disposed of at an approved location and may not be placed in tree pits, storm drains, or sanitary sewers, or onto sidewalks, streets, or other public or private space. 16, all mobile vendors shall be required to connect to on-site utilities, including electrical, water, and sanitary sewer. Generator use is only allowed when electrical service is disrupted or temporarily non-available due to designated disaster-related events. I don't know if you want to add language here about regular maintenance.
Yeah,
and
because
returning.
we need some sort of assurances that they won't be using, I have a lot of experience with generators, and they need to be exercised every week in order to
Mhm.
properly function at the time they need. And that is a very disruptive environment during the 15 minutes they're running. So I want to hear what the applicant has to say about addressing that before we put a final condition in there, because
Okay.
the indication I got is there would be several of those versus one master. And we just need to hear more before I know how to
Okay.
give you some advice on that.
I'll put an asterisk there. 17, all mobile vendors and park facilities must comply with FEMA regulations. No temporary storage containers are permitted. All mobile vendors will be required to evacuate the property when evacuation orders are issued by the Lee County Emergency Management or the Town of Fort Myers Beach. The removal of vendor vehicles is the responsibility of the property owner. Vendors may not return until authorized by the town, and here I've crossed out or and put an Lee County Sheriff's Office. 18, restroom facilities must be provided based on maximum occupancy of the total seating area in conformance with the Florida Building Code. 19, all alcohol sales must be in conformance with state regulations. 20, a local development order is required prior to any development of the site in accordance with this plan development approval and consistent with the approved master concept plan.
Sorry, the question 18, are those facilities in addition to the comfort station?
No, we don't know how many, the capacity of those restroom facilities, and the Florida Building Code lays out how many individual people you can serve in a restroom based on your seating at your facility.
I guess
So
just for-
it has to comply, we don't,
Sure, I'm sure the regs will tell us what size it has to be, but the representation was we're doing this comfort station as a benefit to the development. You're indicating it's a requirement for the development.
yes.
Okay, as long as that's clear.
They're required to have restrooms, they're not required to have those restrooms open to the public.
Understood.
With these, do we need to say, like, permanent restrooms versus portable? Do we
You
need any
can, we
language
can
like that?
further state it, that's what's shown on the master concept plan as a
Yes,
permanent.
permanent, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, local development order is required prior to any development of the site in accordance with this plan development approval and consistent with the approved master concept plan. There we can add language, or we can put it in the end about requiring, a small area traffic impact study, prior to development order approval. Okay, 21, all state and local permits, including but not limited to right-of-way and stormwater permits, must be applied for and received prior to site development. 22, all signage and landscaping must meet the vehicle visibility at intersection requirements found in section 34-3131. 23, access to and from the property for mobile vendors only via the Estero Boulevard access point will not be allowed during typical peak season traffic times, which are 8 AM to 11 AM and 4 PM to 7 PM. 24, at the time of local development order approval, directional and restrictive vehicle access signage, e.g. no through traffic, will be provided at the primary access and along Chapel Street and Cottage Avenue. I thought the suggestion of the forced right on Chapel to be a good one, and certainly one we can review during the traffic study. 25, at the time of local development order approval, on-street, right-of-way buffer landscape plantings, no parking signage and infrastructure, e.g. decorative posts and rope chain, will be provided to help eliminate illegally parked vehicles within the Chapel Street and Cottage Avenue right-of-ways abutting the subject property. The on-street right-of-way buffer landscape area will vary in width based on the roadway configuration and consist of shrubs and trees complementary to the adjacent on-site landscaping. Be maintained less than 36 inches high for shrubs and will not violate vehicle visibility requirements. 26, outdoor lighting. In no case may the illumination exceed 0.2 foot candles measured at the property line. The amount of illumination projected onto a residentially zoned property or use from another property may not exceed 0 foot candles, measured at 10 feet from the property line onto the adjacent residential property. Current regulations allow for a 0.5 foot candles measured at the property line and 0.2 foot candles 10 feet from the property onto residential property. So this is a further restriction. 27, proper site management, including site cleanliness and proper waste removal, is the responsibility of the property owner, manager, and any violations will be issued to the site ownership, remediation, and not to individual vendors. This is to help the town clarify how to enforce the regulation upon the management and not trying to figure out which vendor caused the issue. That's up for the property manager to do. The minor traffic impact study can be required for development. This is not in there, this is added language. Approval of this CPD does not preclude a traffic mitigation requirement consistent with the land development code, which may be identified at the time of development order. So that's a suggested addition based on today's conversation. Okay, that's it.
Anything else? Okay, any questions for Judith at the moment?
Do we wanna discuss making the changes that we wanna add to it?
I was gonna let Mr. Davies
Okay.
rebut before we go to that, but thank you. Okay, Mr. Davies, any rebuttal?
Yes, ma'am. Ken's gonna start and I'll wrap up.
All right, Ken Galander for the record. Good to still be here. So
So we,
we're making progress, I think. But thanks again for the opportunity. So just, I think jumping into it, one thing, and Judith did a fine job of making clarifications on some of these points. I may just be reiterating it, so bear with me. Regarding the TIS and the statements made earlier, we did, the TIS was not required as staff represented because of our position and what we had submitted in our submittal documents, acknowledging the less intensity of the development. Now, respectfully, I have to mention our research. There is an approved TIS that's associated with the development order for the project that was being implemented, the CPD, that was issued in 2008. So based on that, we want to confirm that we are okay with the condition. And our condition is that we would do a trip generation study in a comparison with that TIS to acknowledge that, based on our opinion, that our project would be less intense than that development, and we would do that at time of development order. So it would be a comparison of that existing TIS through our trip generation study. Regarding the conditions, and again, Judith made points that, yes, there's 27 and what, 28 now? So, and that's an appropriate process that we're going through the CPD process. The existing CPD had many deviation or conditions. Some of those were actually brought forth under this one. In my opinion, in our opinion, a lot of the conditions are just given, or the obvious, that existing master concept plan isn't applicable anymore. That we understand that. Or we would have to abide by FEMA regulations. Of course we would have to do that. That would all be, but we're acknowledging that those are appropriate to be stated in here. Then there's those conditions that we need to have in place as we are working with staff, comments and aspects of coordinating with the neighbors and concerns, we need to add, or we need to recognize those. And that's through the CPD process, or the plan development process, that's appropriate. Regarding the appraisal, I think it was all stated at the beginning. Our
position is that is not appropriate under the criteria for the rezoning.
You're referring to Mr. Simmons' testimony?
Yes, ma'am, yes. Let's see. Hit on the TIS. No, anything else that was? Obviously, the music. We are wanting to acknowledge, Jane, you brought that up during my testimony regarding the music, and we are committed to amending the condition to strictly reflect that any music amplified, we still want to maintain that, but that would be within the building. It would not be located outside, and also conditioning that no food truck may be,
Ken, that's a bit of a
music.
that's a bit of a play on words, because
Okay.
what you're committing, what you wanna commit to is that you have control of the volume in the building. Or are you saying that the musicians will be inside of a building?
both.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there will
The
be
musicians, the entertainment
will
will
all
be within the building.
contained within a building.
No.
Well,
That's what I'm,
They will
I'm just trying to ask him the question.
we can bring up,
That's, don't bring up anything, just tell me yes or no. Is it gonna be inside of a building?
it will be roofed
Mhm.
and at least 3 walls,
Okay, okay.
So,
oriented towards Estero Boulevard.
Right.
No different than
Okay.
like what we agreed on in Sandy
But-
Bottoms.
so I don't know if you, or Dan, or somebody else talked about this, but Anita brought this up, so I'm gonna jump on it while we're in this conversation. What if we, not what if we had a criteria, there was no live music at this location as a condition of approval for everything else we're talking about? What's your reaction?
My reaction?
Well, on behalf of the client. Now yours.
Yeah, I would have to have a conversation with that, but as we're sitting here, and as I mentioned, we want the amplified music and outdoor entertainment, but we are willing to guarantee that it's oriented away from the residential properties and within the confines.
But we all know the reality of that is it's
That's right.
impossible. It's
Yeah,
It's
impossible.
impossible.
Just a
to do.
point.
The impact is still the same.
That's right.
But
Go ahead.
the amplified piece is a big one, right?
The
Like, if
amplified
you
piece
don't-
is a big one.
If you don't amplify it, if you had a person or a duet with a guitar and a keyboard, that is far different than amplified guitar and keyboard, right? And so, and there is a distinct difference, and if you put 3 walls around me and a guitar, first of all, nobody'd listen, but
Could we,
it's not gonna carry any more than, very far.
could
Online, I
we,
think it's in your
could we
property.
set like a, and I know we have ordinances on this already, but wouldn't it be more simplified if we set a decibel limit or something, rather than?
It's
So
hard,
we'd
it's
have
just
to-
very hard to,
It's very hard. And it puts the onus on them.
right.
They're the ones that will have to complain. There's a-
Don's suggesting that it would be acoustic.
Acoustic.
Yes.
Yep,
Acoustic
acoustic
music.
performances only, it would be the.
Dan, are
the
you standing
question.
up
So
because
if
you
we
wanna
had-
say yes, no amplified music?
I wanna,
Well, just come back over here. Just asking.
I wanna, I guess, discuss,
On the
Say,
microphone.
say your name for the
Dan
record
Myers,
again.
hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Good
Dan.
morning, the first time you spoke. If we remove the amplified and maybe just kept live music, I'm a classical guy, I like the violin, I like, I'm not gonna say we're gonna have a piano there, but
But that
I
might be
I
cool.
wanna try to find a balance.
Yeah, it could be
And to do this, I mean, this might take some time, we can't commit now, cause we still have council coming up. But I wanna know if that would appease neighbors, if that would, really help out, this process if we took away the amplification. And during the daytime, or whatever case, we just have, ambient music throughout, and we contain that how we could. But if we removed all amplified live music, or maybe we go, twice a month, so at least it gives us an option to, I don't know, see, this is where I need to, rather than being on the spot and figuring this out, I am more than open to considering these options.
Okay, then we'll consider our
Okay.
conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you very
But
much.
has anybody ever seen even a duo or an individual that is not plugged into an amp, regardless of how
Not a
loud it
not a
is?
single one.
You
Or
kinda
a
have to
single
be.
keyboard?
You haven't? I have.
Oh, I
don't-
have.
I
mean, I
it,
have
but
in
not
a-
here on Fort Myers
Oh, not on
Beach.
Fort Myers
No,
Beach,
Yeah.
no,
here.
that's
Oh,
why
here
it'd be
louder
unique.
is better. That's right.
And I
think
would
that
like
with the traffic noise and everything, it would be pretty difficult for a musician to. But, yeah, certainly in a proper environment, you can have unamplified
Yeah.
music, but I'm
Inside a
not sure this
enclosed
is
building,
where we're gonna
perhaps.
have it.
Okay, Ken, anything else?
Not at this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Noel? Yeah, stay, because I have another question for you. Go ahead.
Thank you,
Noel?
Madam Chair. Again, Noel Davies for the applicant. Just try to be as brief as possible, but there were a number of comments that I think it's important that we do rebut. You know my position on the weight to be given the appraisal testimony. I'm not gonna go through line by line the expert reports, or the testimony. I'm just gonna say that we disagree with them. We have to formally object to their opinions. So I want the record to note that. And rather than doing cross-examination or trying to show you each little bullet point and why we don't agree with it or what the base of our objection is for it, you've got plenty of evidence in the record from Mr. Galander, from your staff, who has reviewed this application, gone back a number of different times, and conditioned it appropriately, which is the essence of your plan development process, right? You have the discretion through your staff and also through these public hearings to create those conditions. I think I heard some comments that there's so many conditions, so that's a bad thing. I mean, every time, we worked with Judith or another member of staff on, hey, can you do this? Can you make this better? We have obliged on that. That's why I think we're at 27, 28, 29, maybe we'll make it above 30. That's not unusual. You guys know that. You do that on PDs. And that's what's cool is probably the wrong word, but it seems cool to me. That's what's interesting about the PD process, right? Instead of the conventional zoning, that flexibility and those conditions. The scale of this thing is not that big, and I just want to zoom back out here because you heard me say we're less intense. I think everyone's aware of the scale of this, but we're talking about the 5 pads. We're talking about the support structure that we've heard. More brick and mortar, less brick and mortar. I mean, it seems like what we had heard at the last hearing was to have this more traditional structure, and we've got now an ice cream stand and the types of family-friendly uses that would come with this type of family-friendly project. There are a lot of options that are by right today that are more intense and more impactful than what we're proposing. All due respect to the neighbors, I think that they've gotten used to the fact that the property near them has been vacant for a long, long time. Just because the property is vacant.
No, you guys don't do that.
Just because the property is vacant does not mean that it does not have entitlements on it. And so, again, part of your role in assessing the town's rezoning criteria and whether or not that criteria has been met by the applicant is balancing what's entitled by right today and what the proposal is. It's not legally permissible to deny something because you want it to stay vacant or you want no development on there. I'm not suggesting that that's what you're thinking about, but I just think the precision with which the legal requirements mandate that you look at the specific rezoning criteria and you look at what it is that we're proposing based on a comparison to what's entitled by right today. Protecting residential neighborhoods from commercial intrusion. Respectfully, Anita, you cannot say this is commercial intrusion when you have commercial there today. This is not a rezone of exclusively residential property. There are commercial entitlements on most of the property today, and that has meaning We are not coming in here like a lot of other developers and asking for a whole bunch more than what we have today. We are asking for less. And to boot, we're providing you with those public restrooms, which frankly, it seems to have been perverted that now those are a bad thing. I've been here for hearings where a number of times you've asked the development community to try to provide you with this important public benefit. My client has agreed to do it and is doing it on the first ask. It's
Wait,
not.
no, calm down for a second. Nobody said it was bad. Jim just asked the question, if it's required for you to have restrooms, how then do they become a benefit to the public? The benefit is that they're allowed to be, they're open to the public. But you had to have them anyway.
Well, but sure, the key component is the accessibility to the public,
Sure.
which has been met with significant resistance by developers.
Nobody said anything bad about that.
Oh, I thought I heard a comment about shooting up in the restrooms.
Oh, well, that,
And so.
well, listen, people are concerned about that, so.
But I mentioned that because my last point is that with respect to your duties of weighing that rezoning criteria, you're also responsible for giving the testimony that you've heard today the proper weight.
Of course,
Right.
we know that.
And expert testimony and the appraiser testimony and lay testimony. Now, I know you've heard from Nancy, and I agree with her that testimony from a town resident that's based on their personal knowledge can be considered. And there's case law that supports that that's competent, substantial evidence, but you've gotta, do the judicial or the quasi-judicial weighing of those interests and weighing that against the other very substantial and very competent evidence that you've heard from your staff and from the applicant's team. And with that, we do meet your rezoning criteria based on that evidence and pursuant to that legal standard. And because of that, we'd ask that you please approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. You're finished.
Can we open the door?
Our agreed party letter does entitle us to a rebuttal.
I would object to that. Or the applicant.
Naturally.
We get the last word. That's how it works.
That is how it works.
Well, the
David?
letter we submitted does ask for an opportunity to rebut, and you did vote on it. I do believe we're entitled to it.
Yes,
I also believe, excuse me, if I may, the agreed parties who spoke before, I think he made some comments regarding what their views are, and I just wanted to clarify. At no point.
David, at the very beginning of the meeting, I said, I don't wanna get into this back and forth tit for tat.
And I don't, and I.
Come to the
I'll
microphone.
be very brief. I just want to clarify, at no point did either of our parties or our experts or myself or anyone who has spoken in opposition pretend that what we want is non-development on this
And
site.
we understand that.
Right. But
We
that's what
understand
was
that
said, and
completely.
so since he
We-
responded to our comments, I
We
wanted to
understand,
just
we
put that
understand.
out there.
This is, these people are pretty smart.
Yeah, no, okay,
Thank you very
thank you so much, thank you.
They're very smart.
So procedurally, I think at the onset of our hearing this morning, there was discussion about cross-examination.
Yes.
And I don't recall any direction given by the
There was
LPA
not.
as far as rebuttal. Rebuttal is
No.
different from cross-examination.
Okay, let me ask you, gentlemen, are you finished rebutting? Because really, who you need to listen to right now are these 6 people.
Here we go.
Yes, ma'am. I'm finished, and I'm happy to answer
Well, 7,
questions if
but,
there are.
Madam
and if we
Chair.
have any questions, we'll ask you. How about that?
Discounting one.
Madam Chair, also, if I may, at the beginning of today's meeting, we talked about the different property rights that are at play. The fact that it is the property owner who has the most things at stake here, and the aggrieved parties or adversely affected parties, interveners, they too have a property right interest at stake, but not to the same degree as the
Yes.
property owner. And for that reason, in all due fairness, it's generally the property owner that has the last say. So if you had intended to do rebuttal, I think that it would have been the interveners
Okay,
first.
for the record, I'm going to ask you 2 gentlemen, Noel and David. I'm gonna ask you, do you feel like you've been adequately heard, fairly heard? I want you to say yes or no.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, Dol. I appreciate that. Okay. We are okay?
Absolutely, thank
And
you so
Ken,
much.
have you had enough?
From you? No. Yes.
because we may have questions, in which case
You
we'll
told me
call
to
you
sit
back
down
up.
and-
I told you to sit down. All right. All
I was
right.
gonna call you Fred.
Are you getting all that down on paper? All right, good.
Can wait to read your report.
You're gonna- Okay.
Anita yelled at the office.
I'm not yelling.
Oh,
I'm just
right.
trying. I'm just trying to.
Just excited.
Yes. All right. So, I'd like to hear what you all have to say now at this point, and I'm going to start with John McLean.
Thank you, Anita.
You're very welcome, John.
And thank you to both parties for very thoughtful, well-researched, well-argued positions. Number one, I think that this is absolutely appropriate process for us to be considering these things in that this is something that had not been addressed, and this is the mechanism by which we can do it. This proposed use is not addressed by the code. It's also, I guess, it is something that is allowable, even though it is not addressed directly by the code. And I completely respect that the existing rights that this property has, while they are less intense, or excuse me, while the proposed use is less intense than the use that it currently has on this property, I think it's substantially different. And the main reason I think it's substantially different is that an open-air facility like this just has significantly less control over the environment and the way that that environment is used, as well as the impact. I have visited several of the food truck courts that have been referenced, and I didn't see any that were right up against a residential neighborhood. They specifically, and I find that that is something that probably should be addressed by the ordinances, in that I think the location is the thing that I have the most concern about, of whether it is compatible with the neighborhood specifically, whether it's intrusive and a nuisance to the neighbors. And for those reasons, I don't think that it is compatible with the specific neighbors along here. And I believe that it's gonna cause nuisance and harm.
Okay.
That's what I've said.
John, did you have anything that you wanted to, any points you wanted to add, or any details on any of the conditions?
Yeah, I don't know that the traffic study is something that's really required either way. I don't think it makes an impact. As far as the music, that seems to be a concern to the neighbors, and anything to mitigate. I believe that having the music within a semi-enclosed structure is going to help mitigate the nuisance to the neighbors, especially if it's pointing in the other direction. We've all seen, for example, when the Rude Shrimp was at Moss Marina, just changing the directions of the speakers and putting them behind a container made a world of difference to that neighborhood. So I would suggest that we not, if this is passed and approved, that we not limit them to acoustic only. I think it could be managed just fine with amplified music. We're not talking about stacks of Marshall amps here. We're talking about somebody plugging into a
Okay.
into an amp.
Okay.
That's it.
Thanks, John. Jim, comments? Or any additions or anything to the conditions?
Well, I agree with John that this is less intensive, but it's more intrusive than the existing CPD would be with the building structure. And with the building structure, the music, amplified or not, inside would be a lot less intrusive on the neighbors. I was a strong no the first time we took a vote on this, but I've seen a substantial effort by the petitioner to listen to the neighbors' concerns. I think food trucks are a great concept. I think there's a place for them on the beach. I just don't know that this is the right spot. And that's because of the adjacent residential. I, like John, have looked at the other food truck pavilions in the area, including the one in Naples, which hasn't been brought up. And they are not adjacent to residential. They are in a commercial setting or in a adjacent to public land or public park. And that makes them less intrusive on the quality of life and the enjoyment of the neighbors, which I think everybody needs to be sensitive to.
Okay, thanks. And Judith, you made the change in the condition that Jim had suggested relative to the pervious grid or impervious grid. Okay, so that's, okay, Jane?
Well, I think on Estero Boulevard, it's hard to not be commercial intrusion into residential neighborhoods until you get down to like Laguna Shores, because commercial is the entire boulevard and it's only one block deep on either way. So I mean, it's in several areas until you get down further in the south. So I don't think that can really, it's not something we can really calculate here on Fort Myers Beach. But the things that I would be interested in adding to conditions is number 8, the hours. I would ask the owners to consider possibly 7 to 9.
Are you asking them to consider this, or are you making this a condition?
I'm talking to the board
Oh,
as
okay.
our discussion
Oh,
right
okay,
now,
okay.
that we might consider 7 to 9, stopping them using at 8 o'clock, which would cover the dinner hour and that kind of thing. On number 11, that we would put required, which is the grid, I believe, is what that was.
Yeah,
Number 16, address, we need to still discuss and the generator issue. And, I don't think that, a trip generator, a traffic study would help in any way, either way, because right now it just stands still there anyway, so. And on 17, to add the and, which you already did, if I understand that correctly, and took out the or. And I would also like to ask that the bathrooms be locked up at close of business, that they not just be open 24/7, just because it does make it where homeless might wanna spend the night, or, you know, a nice place to stay. That the condition be that the music must be inside the building, with 2 sides covered, on that corner that you, pictured it on the thing, and that possibly that it be, only, acoustical music on the weekends, and just have, fun music that, you know, oldies, whatever, that play around for people to enjoy, that doesn't have to be really loud. Conversational music, I should say, you know, that you can actually talk to somebody sitting next to you.
Ambient.
Yeah, something like that. But those are the things that I would like to have discussion with the group on.
Let me ask you something. What about the thing that was brought up about the tables? How would the tables be accommodated when they close, so that people don't just go and sit at the tables?
Well, we don't close down our benches on Estero Boulevard at night, and we,
That's public property.
that is public property, but, you know, the, let's see, what is another good example?
But you don't
The
have any
restaurants in
issue, you don't
Times
have any
Square.
issue with the,
No, no, because
Okay.
I think that, you know, it would, if it became a gathering place, then there would be, you know, complaints for police to drive through and, you know, correct that issue. The other thing I think that is not being really looked at is that I do believe that this will be less noise than if you did have a restaurant there, because I think there would be open floors and music inside there that would go out both ways, and that wouldn't be contained, just like the ones that are being built all over the island. So I think, big picture, it's on the ground, and it is gonna have some bushes and some walls around it. Whereas you get it up in the air and it's gonna carry a whole lot further. So if you're looking at, the lesser of two bads, I think it could be a better choice.
Okay, anything else, Jane? Nope. Doug?
Thank you. Good presentations by everyone. I missed the last meeting and it was a tie vote, but I did watch all of that meeting. This is, I really kind of struggled with how I view this, because there's good arguments on either side, but I think the way I'm leaning it right now is that I think the concerns of noise, smells, transients are imagined, and they may in fact happen, but I think my feeling is it might not be as bad as it's being imagined. Like Jane just said, if somebody was to build a restaurant there, they would want to go to the 3 stories we allow. They'd want to have open decks looking out to the beach, and they would want to have live music. And they would probably want to have louder live music than what's been proposed here. There was arguments for we should see something brick and mortar. Well, the applicant has really changed the building to provide brick and mortar, and it's right up against the one residence that's really close to the property. And I am imagining any music or anything, there'd be an open bar, but it would be facing Estero Boulevard, like's been discussed, which really mitigates that. I think if the whole site was commercial parking, you would have just as much traffic. You'd probably have just as much traffic if you had a restaurant. It seems like, I do think that we should do the limited traffic analysis, because I do think there might be a situation where we want to have a right turn only on Chapel when you come out and get on Estero and not take a left on Estero.
Or on Cottage?
I think they agreed to that.
Or Cottage.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it seems pedestrian friendly, which fits our comprehensive planning. It's resilient in the sense that the restaurant trailers can be removed if there's a storm coming. And we're not talking about trailer, food trucks in a parking lot where they got their generators and wires all over the place. We're talking about you're going to have a sewer system. They're going to be hooked up. They're going to have their own power. The generators are only for emergencies, or in emergencies they're going to just leave, anyway. So I don't think that's really an issue. And we're not talking about commercial generators that have to be exercised. I mean, they can exercise their generator when they got their trailer back at the house or something. But I think it's a service that would be popular, kind of needed. I think like I say, I think it's something folks will walk to. If you have a restaurant, people are going to drive to the restaurant. But something like this, I think, is more open. It's like street friendly. We talked about that in our comprehensive plan. The small town character was mentioned by our planner. Human scale was mentioned by our planner, which it seems to have. I think as far as the expert witnesses, I think the property value is kind of a speculative thing, and I know it's been argued that we shouldn't even consider it, but I'm not sure it even makes any sense to talk about that, because we don't know that. It may go up or down, or the market conditions may overwhelm any other factors. And I think the noise, the music, I like music. I think they should be allowed to have music, live music, but I think it can be managed so that it's, with our own noise ordinances that we have right now, we can make sure that it's not, I think we can manage the noise of, at least of music. I really struggle with this, but I think in the overall weighing all the factors, I think the project has value.
Okay, Don?
Yeah, I struggle too. I don't have a lot to add other than just to say that, you know, the applicant has, certainly has property rights. And, you know, I think the folks around it certainly have property rights and interest in their properties. So I struggle, you know, on one hand, if it's about noise. When I walked around with the folks, a lot of it seemed to be more about noise than anything. And then they had some issues with the way traffic would come through the property. I think there are ways to address that, whether it be, you know, gating, Pelican Watch. The people I feel the most for probably are the single residences, because they're being affected today. We've heard from them. They're already experiencing it, and they will experience it. Like it or not, it will happen. But at the end of the day, it is a commercial property. There's commercial property all around it. So I struggle with restricting it any much more than it already is or is being contemplated. I think the applicants have heard loud and clear what the concerns are of the residents around there and and frankly the LPA. Certainly heard everything last time, and we came back with frankly a much better design. In fact, it's amazing the design is very similar to what I talked about with the folks at Pelican Watch when I was standing out on their pool deck. So I think a lot of things have been addressed. So not a lot more to add. I would like to hear, I've heard it already, but just say, you know, if there was a way, I heard Dan say it, if there was a way to either, you know, limit the live music to 3 days a week or limit it to some, you know, I understand we have an ordinance for noise, but, you know, the reality is it's hard to manage that or manage compliance to it. So if there was anything we could do with this, I think is try to restrict that noise to certain times. Back to Jane's point, you know, I was thinking the same. I was thinking, gosh, if I'm in Pelican Watch and they open at 7 o'clock, that means people are going to be out there at 6 setting up, and you're going to hear it, right? If you've ever stayed at the Pink Shell, you hear things going on if it's banquets at night or other things setting up in the morning. So, you know, if you could limit the hours, maybe even limit the hours to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. But anyway, just to try to respect the residents and potentially not, you know, not pull people in too late. I do think at the end of the day, it's going to be a parking lot for access to the beach. If you close too early, it's just going to be people pulling in for sunset. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Jim?
Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome.
So I'm not gonna repeat what I did last time. I do think that the time that we gave the parties to talk was beneficial for all of us, including the community, because we're learning as we go through the process, and we're learning it together, and we're learning it in real time. So I think that was productive. The only thing I would editorially say before I put in a couple points is that the comment made about transparency, I don't know how this body and this process could be any more transparent than it was. I'm proud of what we did in that regard, and I would argue with anybody that said they didn't have a voice or an opportunity to express their points of view, and that is why we're sitting here today, and I wouldn't be on this body if we had anything else going on. So thank you for bringing us to an opportunity to challenge that a bit, because I think we've done a good job of that. Now, I mentioned this in several of the past cases we looked at. The thing that matters to me is not only what we're doing, but who we're doing it with. This is a local person, it's a local neighbor, it has local at-risk capital that I think has tried to have conversations that are beneficial and compromise biased against the concerns and the issues. I've asked a couple of questions, trying to get hard no's out of people, and there haven't been some of those. I look at that as the proper way to negotiate, and some of these things still need to be settled. So I appreciate the people doing this. I'd rather do that than people we don't know that are making promises they don't have to keep and don't have the consequences of somebody living just a few doors down that would have to deal with something they promised and didn't get kept. So that matters to me, and I know it matters to all of us. Don't mean to get personal. The other thing I would say, and I talked to the neighborhood group about, not the neighborhood group, the Pelican folks about this. There's a lot of criteria here, and while, Ken, you're right, many of them are boilerplate and have to be there anyway, they all have to be complied with, and you all know that. What Judith's done is try to create an architecture here for like-kind situations and opportunities that we can leverage this learning curve, codify it into an ordinance at some point should we choose to go that route. But in any event, we have to deal with what we're dealing with now. And I think you've done a good job of creating a very comprehensive inventory of conditions and criteria under which this entity needs to operate. That being said, it then comes down to compliance. and enforcement. And I would suggest, if we can codify this in some sort of a condition of the writing, that we need to put as much of that responsibility on the owners and the operators as possible. So what does that look like in my mind? I think there ought to be some prearranged, and let's use quarterly for a straw man here, prearranged meeting that the owners have with our code enforcement and or our compliance people. And they would bring forth, for that, say the first 2 years of operation, a list of verifications and validations and codifications that the things they agreed to here are being complied with. Doesn't mean we can't do on-site code enforcement or anything like that. I just think it brings a different set of discipline to know that you have a meeting with the people that control your operating destiny, and you're gonna come prepared to represent the things that you agreed to do, you're doing. In the meantime, any accumulated inventory by neighbors or other interested parties that happen to come to the town can be kept on file here too. And those conversations, I think, could be a best practice of reality versus representation. And that ought to always be on the owner's side. I think we'll never have the staff, the time, or the wherewithal to check on all this all the time. And I don't think that's fair to the agreement we're making, let alone to the neighbors. I mentioned this to them when I was in their residences. So I'd like to include a requirement that for, like I say, the first couple years of operation to show that it's up, it's running, it's consistent, it's complied with, and it's aligned with all the things they agreed to do as they agreed to do them. That can grandfather at some point and go away, and the attorney can tell us we can put something legally like that in place. But I think many of the owners that agree to these kind of things ought to own the responsibility of proving to us they're doing it. With that, I'll leave it there.
And how do you suggest that, how do you suggest that's incorporated into this? As a 29th condition or 28th condition?
It ought to be an overarching condition, in my mind, that says subject to quarterly compliance and reporting back to whatever department in the town that we want them to come to. That thing would happen on a regularly scheduled basis. It isn't a public meeting, but it's a compliance meeting, alignment meeting. So whether it's 30, which makes it sound like one of 29, I'd rather it be something, and these are all conditioned by and overarching by a requirement by the owner to quarterly report into the town.
It could be a
as relates-
whereas clause.
That's correct.
Nancy? You get that?
I would prefer it to be a condition rather than within the whereas clause, but the whereas clause could be used to justify why it is a condition.
Yes, yes.
Well, if
Okay.
you all consider that in your conversations there, I'd like to talk more about it if you're interested.
Okay, anything else, Jim?
That'll do it, thanks.
So could we, go ahead.
Could I ask the staff a question?
Yeah.
Okay. While we don't have the master concept plan, the 2007 0728 ordinance on the schedule of uses, which is, we keep referring to the underlying CPD. It says that the schedule of uses could be a maximum of 23,067 square feet, which would consist of residential dwelling units, no more than 3 units, lodging rental units, office administrative, retail store less than 5,000 square feet, civic, essential services, daycare, and cultural facilities. So this discussion about
The 3-story open
yeah,
restaurant
a
doesn't exist.
restaurant and 2 stories and open,
It was a restaurant.
it doesn't seem like
But it's
that would
not in
fit
the
under
existing
the,
uses.
doesn't fit under the 07 ordinance. So that would have to go through the same process
Correct.
that we would here. It's not an entitled right.
Right, I see what you're
Okay.
saying.
Sounds
So a 3-story, 2-story open
Yeah.
could be denied as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, so other than Jim's suggestion, could we talk for a moment about the hours of operation that's been brought up by a couple of you? So, do you have a desire to modify the condition for the hours of operation? Don, Jane?
I'm just saying, when I go by restaurants now, they're all closed down at 8 o'clock, so I mean, you know, I mean, the things that are on Estero Boulevard that you can see, and, so I'm just thinking that, you know, yes, the hours might get longer after rebuilding and people are here, so I was thinking possibly 9 o'clock, and then the music stop at 8 o'clock. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, let me ask about the curability of that. If we decide to make that condition, what's the process to change that once or redevelop, season enhance, et cetera? Can somebody?
They have to come in and amend their CPD, cause it's
So it's an entire
it's a
new
condition,
process.
it's a
Right.
condition of their CPD.
That doesn't seem fair.
Just wanna be very careful to not get
It
into.
isn't, I mean, unless you
Yeah.
really, that's what you want.
Well, I want it on the record.
And the only and the only reason that you would do that would be as protection for the residents.
Yeah,
Now-
that's entirely my interest.
Does hours of operation include,
The parking lot,
Yeah.
the bathroom.
well, I say that, I told you, I was leaving to take my daughter to the airport early this morning, and one of the few vehicles I saw out in commercial areas was dump trucks. They were making their pickups before there was any traffic.
Right.
And that was at 5:30 this morning.
That's, well, you're gonna get that with the dumpsters. They're
course
gonna
you
get
are.
picked up.
That's
Any
what I-
grease trap
I'm
pump
saying
out
is,
or grease.
is hours of operation just hours of operation for the facility?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about deliveries
Operating hours.
and disposal as well?
Yeah, well, I think if you limit operating hours, you'll have 1 hour on either side of it. So that's why I think, you know, if I
You
had to
could
say.
include deliveries
Right,
and
you could,
service,
yeah.
you could
Right.
include that in the operating hours, because when we did the Times Square CRA, that, we did include that, for that
Right.
very reason.
Yep.
Well, I would like to, have a consensus on locking the bathrooms after the
Wait,
restaurant.
let's stick with it, stick with the hours
Okay.
first. So what's the consensus about the hours? Are we, Dawn, do you want to change the hours and, modify that condition or not?
I do. I mean, I think we're saying it's the applicant's saying it's a family,
Mhm.
you know, situation. Let's make it a family situation.
So what are the hours?
I'd love to, I don't wanna put the applicant in too much of a pickle, but I'd probably go like 9 to 8 if I
No,
had to.
you gotta have breakfast.
Huh?
Breakfast hours, you gotta have breakfast. People get up at 7
Okay.
o'clock.
And the only thing I would ask us to think about pragmatically is, what is one of the most important things that happens every
Sunset.
afternoon, evening on the beach?
Sunset.
Why would we make an operation not be open to watch that magnificent thing?
So sunrise to sunset, you're
It's a
saying?
much different thing
Yeah.
right there.
I mean, that sunrise is at 6 something in the morning at times.
It could be later than that, so I'm just talking about,
Yeah, right.
back end is what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So Jane's suggestion was 7 AM to 9 PM with music stopping at 8.
The outrigger did.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
You
fine.
like that?
Yeah.
Do you all like that? Even though I know you don't like it in general, but do you like that?
Well, I can be
It's-
swayed if there's enough conditions.
Well, that's what the conditions are doing, they're protecting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so Judith, we're modifying the condition of the hours of operation, which do the hours of operation include service,
The restaurant,
trash, deliveries, or whatever?
no.
Can you dictate that?
You
have
can,
to-
you absolutely can dictate
Well,
that.
how it was, you could finish your food and your, you know, so that, I mean, you stop serving at 9 o'clock.
I'm talking about trash and deliveries and service to the business. Is that included in their hours of operation? Or like somebody else said, can Cisco come at 6 o'clock in the morning? Or like Jim said, can the
roll-off
dump
trucks,
trucks
right.
roll out at 5
Or,
AM?
I'd
or
say you
the
have to
beer
have a-
truck come in.
Or the beer truck.
I'd say you have to have that opportunity an hour before, the hour after. But I don't see them out here at 10 o'clock at night, and
Probably, yeah, I think you'll see them early, but
I
yeah,
think so
probably not
too.
late. Nobody wants to be here till the evening. Yeah, I
So are those services included or not included in the hours of operation?
I say not included.
Okay?
We haven't
Not
ever done that
included.
to any other
Okay.
restaurant.
Yes, we have, not included, all right. You know what, before I go on, it's obvious, you know, if there was a family that I would love to see do this, it's you all, in all seriousness. But and Noel, I know it sounds commercial intrusion, and you know, I'm still embedded in those days of incorporation and what. This is less intense, I agree with you completely, but it is more intrusive. It is more intrusive, and it just can't help but be. Do I love the project? I love it, and the changes you made from last time to now, I think are fantastic, but I still don't think it fits right there, and that's why I can't support it. But obviously, you have 4 votes here, so now we're just trying to negotiate the nitty-gritty, okay? Bathrooms. I think closing the bathrooms is extraordinarily important, but I also think it's important, like somebody brought up, about the tables. The tables, what happens, Dan, are you hearing this? Because you may come up with a great idea. The tables just being there, we don't have what I would call the loitering element that we had pre-Ian, because there's really no place for anybody to be. But we're gonna start creating those places again, and that may end up being a function of the ownership dealing with that, like you all said before, that may end up happening about that. But what about the bathrooms? Can the bathrooms be locked down?
Yes.
Yes, and
Should be.
electronic locks will do that,
Click, click,
timestamps,
click.
all kinds of things can come, they won't have a problem.
And what about the water for the showers?
Everything shut down.
Yeah,
Okay, so
otherwise animals drinking.
Judith, can you get that somehow in that condition?
Yeah, number 10
Okay.
addresses that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the requirement of the pervious, impervious grid. And now tell me about these generators, because I don't understand exercising a generator. I don't own one. And so is.
Back to what
Doug is
Doug
saying.
was talking about, if they're all self-contained, but they're not gonna be leaving, right?
That's
So-
what Doug's situation would require, them
Right.
leaving.
If if there's a smaller generators, they can be taken off. A lot of the food
Yeah.
trucks have them sitting on the,
If that's the case,
Yeah,
that's
on
a
the
different
frame.
configuration than I was thinking through.
they probably won't have them there. I wouldn't leave a generator there if I own one of these food trucks because
Be in somebody's trunk.
I'm hooked up and, so.
Should there be a condition that prohibits the exercising of generators on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I think I would be okay with that.
I think it is already stated that the
Well,
generators would only be used
But
in
hang
case of
on, like,
emergencies.
what if the structure has a backup generator for power? Because think about it, in another hurricane, you're gonna want this place, cause it's gonna be one of the only places that can serve food on
Be a
the
central
island, so-
conduit then.
Right, so it seems to me like you might have a generator on site, or maybe you'll have a big enough generator that each of those food trucks can plug into it if they need to, I don't know.
At central conduit, and
Right.
you can set up pre-arranged rentals on that, I mean, those
I mean,
things
if they've evacuated because of an
Right.
emergency, the truck's gone, wouldn't they bring
Yep,
the
they bring 'em back.
generator
Right.
back with them?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you just can't say, we're saying there's no generators and
Well, anyway, if
it
you
wouldn't
have
be an
a,
emergency situation.
Well,
if
but
you
that
bring in a
would be-
portable generator, it could be what they call hospital grade,
That's
where
it.
Yeah.
that's got total sound deadening all around it.
So is it or isn't it an issue? Is it not an issue?
No, because it's already in here that says in emergency situations, because they're not going to be running off of generator.
I know that,
So,
Jane, but
we're
what
not gonna
Jim
allow
brought
it.
up was the exercising of the generators on a regular basis,
Not
so that
necessary.
they're,
But if they're not on site, they wouldn't be exercising.
That's the
Yeah.
intention, they're not on site, not like the one we're
Okay.
dealing with.
okay, okay. Let me just see, are we missing anything else for
Noise.
these?
Music, so
The
many days a
music,
week.
the music. So, we haven't decided about the music.
I say, let's do 3 days, because they could do Sunday afternoon and not do evening, they could be Friday and Saturday night, but, during the week, it would be just fun music.
Could we limit it to 3-hour windows or something
No,
like that?
I
No?
think
Okay.
having music there
No, I'm saying
at a
the
lo-
I'm saying the live music piece.
Oh, live
I mean, most
music.
places they're like, 12 to 3, 5 to 8, something like that, right?
True.
So-
To me,
Yeah, I'm
that's
just-
an operational issue.
Yeah.
It's an
Okay.
operational
I
issue. The
just-
question is, do they or do they not get live music? And is it or is it not amplified? Or is all of that taken into consideration in their enclosure now?
I'd like to say 3 days a week in the enclosure and other piped-in music throughout the week and other hours while open.
So they can play music non-amplified anytime, but you're saying 3 days a week live music.
Inside that corner.
Well,
I really kinda hate to restrict
I do too.
how they
Yeah, I mean,
operate.
if we're
I do
saying
too.
the structure's good enough, then the structure's
If
good
the whole point
enough.
was put it inside
Yeah,
and
right.
follow the
And
rules.
they
I mean,
did it,
they're
so-
building a building to
Right.
contain it. I
Okay.
mean, that's pretty big
That's where I'm into.
What do you all
concession, I
think?
think.
I stated that I thought if it was inside those buildings, that an
Right.
amplified would be quite frankly, fine.
Okay.
I don't wanna
Okay.
run this place.
All right.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so we're leaving the music alone.
So we're gonna do it. Do we wanna add language
Okay.
specifically about, because what it says, sorry. What it says right now is that there are outdoor entertainment areas identified on the master concept plan, which is that whole kind of lawn area in the middle. So if you only want it to be projecting from inside that structure, we should add some language.
Yes.
These
Yes.
do.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So there does need to, that, because I think that's kind of what Dan represented when he was up here before.
Exactly.
Yes. That music would be enclosed in that, he's nodding his head, and so is Debbie.
And that is three-sided structure? Or
Three-sided structure.
Yes, it's a three-sided,
structure?
it's a,
Did
how did
you,
you get to sit up here?
And a roof.
did
You
you,
told him to.
You told him to sit down.
Sit down.
That usually implies in your seat.
No,
meant
you
immediately.
wanted him to wait.
You had some more questions
Yeah.
for me.
Stay right there, Calendar. Stay right there.
did your table issue get
Nope.
addressed to your satisfaction?
It
He
did
hasn't called your friend
Okay.
yet,
It
did he?
did not, it did not. But we're assuming that's gonna be an operational issue.
Well, the issue I have around the tables, though, is if there is a named storm coming and you've got all of these picnic
Oh, I
tables
know.
or what have you,
They'll
They,
have to.
they,
they'll
f- they float.
they'll.
They'll go
They do
upstairs.
float,
The
that's,
tables will go upstairs, he just said.
okay.
Okay, is there anything else from anyone here that hits all of my notes?
Those are my notes.
Anybody else? Judith, do you think that you've got everything?
Yes.
Yes?
And what about the self-compliance? Did anybody have a problem with approaching this way? Because I don't know if you've done it before, but this is a complicated one. I think we ought to
I
put
think
something
4
like that.
times a year is a lot,
Well,
Okay.
it's not if you live next door.
Right.
okay?
You're
I
gonna wait,
mean-
you're gonna wait 6 months for, yeah, quarterly is, we can always change it if we choose to do something like that.
I say start with quarterly,
That's
and
where I am.
if there's not a problem, then
It ought to be an easy
you don't
meeting.
need it.
Maybe can you put a sunset in quarterly for,
The first year or something.
for the first 2 years, and then
That's
afterward,
what I
then
was
it
after.
sunsets? Okay.
Exactly.
How are you gonna do that, Judith?
So what I would, and I'm thinking through this on the fly here, but perhaps when they apply for their development order, before they go ahead and approve the property, we lay out a plan about when that's gonna take and who the staff person responsible for that review, perhaps code compliance might be the right entity.
Yep.
And there we draft that, which has
Yep.
all of these, so we're gonna be monitoring for noise and trash and whatever those components of that would be. That we have to create that document at development approval, development order, so that we're all agreeing at that time before moving forward about what that's
Like
gonna
it.
look like.
I do too, and I just, and the whole point is, the teeth in it is it's on the ownership where they're then making the agreement, and secondly, it's a condition of operation. So there's a consequence, and not talking about emotional consequence or complaint or something outside their control. They're sitting with code compliance and saying, these are the 16 things outside the normal code stuff that we need to do relative to us,
And we've done
and
it.
here's our proof we're doing it. And then we can inspect it anytime we want, and we'll be at the day that those are not followed and they represent they are, which is what I was after. We did this in loan covenant agreements all the time.
Oh, it's my greatest hope that this is going to work out somehow. It really is. It's a wonderful neighborhood, and it's wonderful developers. Unfortunately, the two sides aren't meeting here, but I hope it's going to work out. Okay, is somebody gonna make a motion with the changes that have been reflected in the conditions for approval? Nobody's gonna make a motion?
Yeah,
Oh, Jim's
go
going to.
ahead, Doug, if you're gonna do it.
No, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, I just wanna make sure with the attorney, how to do the all-inclusive language to incorporate all the things we talked about right now. Because there's no way to put that in a motion other than just including what's been discussed and approved. with
Yes,
the
I'll
CBD.
work with Judith and we'll go back through, we'll watch the video and make sure we capture it all.
I make a motion to approve accordingly.
Thank you,
I'll
Jim.
second.
And there's a second. There's a motion to approve the request and seconded by, made by Jim and seconded by Doug. Is there any discussion, further discussion on the motion?
Do we need to say that it meets all the conditions and?
I think that's kind of what
Implied in the
Jim's
thing,
implied.
Okay, oh, very good, okay, very good.
Anything else from anyone? Jim, your vote?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
Jean?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
John?
Nay.
Jim?
No,
Me? No? Congratulations. And neighborhood, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna pray this works out. Okay, thank you, Noel, thank you everybody for being here, Motion, nice to see you. Okay, if everybody could keep this down, I'm going to move on to the next items on the agenda, which is the administrative agenda. Maybe we'll just wait a minute here. No, we're gonna keep going. Nancy, so these next two items are, hey, can you guys just please keep
Gavel.
What, your
If everybody could please keep it down, we're continuing our meeting, thank you. The next one is a discussion on the public notice ordinance, which we discussed at our last meeting and previously. I think you did a great job on this. I don't know if anybody has any additional questions or additions?
Judith, yeah, if you want to, I mean, it is a discussion item.
Thank you all,
Judith-
just wanted to thank you all for your time. Thank you.
We're in the middle of our meeting. Judith was responsible for drafting the public notice ordinance, and again, this is just for discussion today, you're not taking a vote on it, but we just wanted to make sure on both of these that we captured what you had been asking us to bring back to you.
I think you did a top-notch job personally, but you know what?
Yep.
Maybe I'm in the minority, like I was before. No.
Anita?
So, what do you all think? Yes,
I'm
Doug?
sorry
Start
to
bringing
interrupt,
tissue
but
to these meetings.
I was hanging my hopes on Doug and he let
I've
me
got
down.
a call that I postponed to 4.
Yes, I
And
know.
this is something you probably discussed without me, you're not voting, so.
Yes, we could have done without you in the last meeting.
So,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, I know.
If Doug needs like a motion of order here for a second, just because there's some meat in the
Yes, there
second
is.
part of
In the
this.
second
Can
one
we
there is.
postpone this to
Yes,
a
we certainly
subsequent
can.
meeting? 'Cause I need Doug's input. This
We
is-
certainly
Oh,
can.
okay.
Let me ask everybody, does anybody have anything really important and pending that we need to discuss in this moment? And if not, may I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Thank you.
Doug,
Okay.
It's for,
Thanks, folks.
Sorry.
Continued next meeting.